The crystal chandeliers of the elite Dallas hotel ballroom cast a harsh, glittering light across the half-empty champagne flutes. I was sitting at table number 4, a prime spot directly near the main stage, surrounded by the wealthiest socialites in the city. The air smelled of expensive perfume, aged oak, and roasted duck. I reached out to pick up my crystal glass for the upcoming toast, seeking just a moment of quiet celebration in a room full of strangers who only cared about last names and bank accounts. My younger sister, Cressida, sneered from across the pristine white tablecloth. She lunged forward with a sharp, predatory movement, her manicured hand snatching the crystal glass right out of my fingers. A few drops of the vintage champagne spilled over the rim, leaving a dark, cold stain on the expensive silk of my dress. "Do not toast with that," Cressida hissed, her voice dripping with venom and artificial superiority. "Put that down right now. You did not pay a single penny for this table, so you do not get to celebrate anything here." My mother, Rowena, did not intervene to calm her down. Instead, she took a slow, deliberate sip of her own drink, her eyes narrowing as she looked me up and down with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. "We only fund real bloodlines tonight," Rowena smirked, her voice loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear. "Real family. Not ungrateful burdens who just sit around taking up space and living off our generosity." The words hit me like a physical slap across the face. They burned with decades of toxic family history, opening old wounds that I thought had finally healed. The pain was sudden and sharp, a familiar ache in my chest that I had carried since childhood. I was always the scapegoat. I was always the invisible child. I was the one they blamed for every minor inconvenience, while lifting Cressida up as the golden child who could do no wrong, no matter how many disasters she caused. But here was the devastating irony that they were completely blind to. They thought they were sitting at a VIP table funded by Cressida's fiancé, Cashin. They thought this lavish display of wealth was their rightful place in high society. They had no idea that I was the one who had secretly funded this entire night. I was the one who placed the $30,000 escrow deposit to secure the table because Cashin's corporate credit cards had mysteriously declined 3 weeks prior during a routine equipment purchase. I did it to save my mother the public embarrassment of being kicked out of the venue. I did it because, deep down, a foolish, broken part of me still wanted their approval, still hoped that one day they would look at me as a daughter and a sister rather than a walking ATM or a punching bag. That foolish, broken part of me died right there at table number 4 under the glittering lights. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice or throw a glass across the room. I am Vesper, 32 years old, an independent financial debt restructuring analyst. I spend my days dismantling toxic corporate liabilities, hunting down hidden debt, and stripping away fraudulent assets. In that exact second, looking at their smug, twisted faces, I realized that my own family was the most toxic liability I had ever encountered, and it was time for a complete liquidation. I quietly reached into my designer clutch resting on my lap. I pulled out my phone and opened my secure banking application with a calm, practiced movement. My thumb hovered over the screen for a fraction of a second before I pressed the cancellation icon. I permanently revoked the $30,000 escrow authorization for the Gala, cutting off the life support of their evening. I stood up smoothly. I pushed my chair back, the wooden legs scraping softly against the thick carpet, creating a subtle contrast to the surrounding laughter. "Where do you think you are going?" Rowena asked, rolling her eyes in deep annoyance. "Are you going to throw a childish tantrum now because you got called out?" I did not answer her. I carefully nodded, adjusted the strap of my bag, put on my winter coat, and turned away. I navigated through the sea of evening gowns and tailored tuxedos, my heels clicking in a steady, rhythmic cadence against the marble floor. I stepped out through the heavy oak doors of the ballroom, but I did not leave the hotel entirely. I lingered in the shadows of the grand foyer, blending into the dim lighting near a massive stone pillar where I could observe the aftermath. From my hidden vantage point, I watched the event manager approach table number 4. He was holding a heavy leather binder containing the night's final accounting. He leaned down, whispering something grim into Cashin's ear before delivering the devastating check directly to the center of the table. I could read the manager's lips perfectly from across the room through the glass partition. The escrow funds have been canceled by the issuer. You are personally responsible for paying the $30,000 right now. The smug, arrogant faces of my mother and sister instantly drained of all color. They turned stark white, looking like two terrified ghosts trapped under the glowing chandeliers. Cashin scrambled frantically for his wallet, pulling out card after card, his hands shaking in sudden, unadulterated panic. They had zero liquidity. They had no way to pay the bill. They had absolutely no idea that this dinner bill was just the opening move in a massive, calculated financial war. Before I reveal how I systematically dismantled their fake empire piece by piece, tell me in the comments where you are watching this from. Hit like and subscribe if you believe walking away and letting them pay the price is the ultimate power move. The chaos unfolding at the table was a masterpiece of immediate panic. Cressida slammed both hands on the white tablecloth, arguing aggressively with the manager and demanding to speak to the owner. Rowena covered her face with her hands, desperately trying to hide from the curious, judging stares of the wealthy socialites sitting at adjacent tables who were whispering behind their champagne flutes. Cashin was swiping his cards repeatedly, only for the manager to shake his head with a polite, cold expression of absolute denial. They were experiencing intense public humiliation, the one thing Rowena feared more than anything else in this world. I turned my back on the ballroom entirely. I walked out of the hotel doors and straight into the cool Texas night air. The valet brought my sedan around the circle. I tipped him generous cash for his prompt service, slid into the driver's seat, and pulled the door shut. The heavy thud of the car door shutting severed the remaining noise of the gala, leaving me in a profound, echoing silence. They thought I was just a bitter, broken spinster running away into the night in defeat. They did not know I was simply driving back to my control center to execute the next phase. Part 2, Threats in the Night and the Museum of Pain, target 1,300 words. The leather seat of my idling sedan felt freezing against my spine as I watched the valet attendant step away from my door, his footsteps fading into the pavement. I shifted the car into drive, letting the vehicle crawl forward into the heavy evening traffic. The city lights blurred past my windshield in long streaks of neon and amber, reflecting the steady rhythm of my thoughts. My phone vibrated violently against the center console, cutting through the quiet hum of the engine. The harsh buzzing rattled the plastic cup holder, demanding immediate attention. I did not reach for it right away. I let the device vibrate 3 consecutive times, calculating the exact level of mounting terror currently unfolding inside that hotel ballroom. At the next red traffic signal, I finally picked up the phone. The screen was flooded with urgent notifications, missed calls, and angry text alerts. They were not from my sister or my mother, who were likely still panicking over the unpaid bill. They were from Cashin. Cashin was 34 years old, operating as the chief executive officer of a mobile application startup that he constantly claimed was the next multi-billion-dollar enterprise in the technology sector. He wore custom-tailored suits, drove expensive leased European sports cars, and constantly projected the image of an untouchable tech prodigy. He also held a dangerously inflated sense of authority over our family finances, believing his charm could bend any rule. I unlocked the screen and opened the message thread, letting my eyes scan the aggressive text lines. "You are going to wire $30,000 to this account right now," Cashin wrote, his digital words practically bleeding through the glass with raw fury. I stared at the glowing text, my jaw tightening just a fraction of a millimeter. A second message appeared instantly on the screen before I could even lock the phone. "You publicly humiliated Cressida tonight, Vesper. Fix this financial mess immediately, or I am pulling the plug on your life." I placed the phone back down on the console, letting the screen glow in the dark interior. The threat was not an idle complaint or an empty warning. It was a loaded weapon he had held to my head for 2 years, and he thought I was too weak to take it away. My mind drifted backward, unlocking a specific, painful exhibit in my personal museum of pain. 2 years ago, under the heavy guise of family solidarity and unconditional love, Rowena had aggressively pressured me into co-signing a short-term commercial bridge loan. Cressida had suddenly decided she wanted to launch a luxury skincare boutique to impress her wealthy friends. She had zero business background, no inventory knowledge, and a credit history that looked like a disaster zone. Rowena had literally collapsed onto my apartment kitchen floor, weeping hysterically, begging me to use my pristine 850 credit score to secure a highly favorable interest rate for the commercial project. I remembered the exact, manipulative words Rowena used that night to soften my resolve. "You are our savior, Vesper. We need you. You're the smart one in this family, the only one who can protect us." I had foolishly believed her performance. I signed the paperwork, tying my immaculate financial reputation and my personal social security number directly to Cressida's vanity project. Currently, Cashin managed that exact debt schedule. He controlled the monthly disbursements from the family accounts to the commercial lender, using my good name as his invisible shield. The phone vibrated a fourth time against the console, shaking the plastic trim. I picked it up again, keeping my thumb resting near the power button to cut him off whenever I chose. "I will deliberately default on the boutique loan tomorrow morning," Cashin sent, outlining his brutal extortion attempt. "Your immaculate credit score will be ruined by noon. Your career in finance will be completely over before the week ends." I read the threat twice, letting every word sink in. A lesser woman might have hyperventilated right there in traffic. A sister governed by lingering familial guilt might have pulled the car over to the gravel shoulder, typed out a frantic apology, and wired the $30,000 just to keep the fragile, abusive peace. I did not blink. My pulse remained a steady, rhythmic drum against my wrists, holding precisely at 60 beats per minute. I set the phone face down on the passenger seat and pressed my foot firmly onto the accelerator, merging onto the highway. Cashin believed my credit score was my single most valuable asset in this world. He assumed the fear of a sudden commercial default would force me into immediate, cowering submission. He viewed my career as an independent debt restructuring analyst as merely a high-paying administrative job, failing entirely to comprehend the systemic, quiet power I wielded on a daily basis. I spent my entire professional life hunting down hidden assets, auditing fraudulent corporate executives, and legally tearing apart multi-million-dollar enterprises from the inside out. He wanted to play a dangerous game of financial leverage, completely unaware of the rules. He was bringing a wooden stick to a drone strike. I navigated the sedan through the winding, manicured roads of my suburban neighborhood, eventually pulling into the pristine driveway of my modern townhome. I cut the engine. The silence inside the cabin was immediate, deep, and profound. I grabbed my heavy leather briefcase from the back seat, feeling the solid, reassuring weight of the hardware inside. I walked through my front door, bypassing the dark kitchen, and headed straight for my home office. I did not turn on the overhead lights. I sat down at my glass desk in the dark room, unlatched the leather briefcase, and pulled out my primary workstation. The machine booted up with a faint hum, casting a stark, pale blue light across my face, highlighting my expressionless features. I ignored my personal phone entirely, leaving Cashin's extortionate text messages completely unanswered and hanging in the digital void. I launched my secure virtual private network, establishing a heavily encrypted tunnel directly to the banking compliance servers to protect my digital footprint. As the cold blue light washed over the dark room, another painful exhibit from my museum of pain flashed through my mind, sharpening my resolve. Just 3 months ago, I had secured a massive, hard-earned promotion at my firm, becoming a senior independent contractor handling high-risk portfolios. I had invited Rowena and Cressida out to a quiet, elegant dinner to share the good news and celebrate a milestone. When I told them the news across the table, Rowena had simply waved her hand dismissively, cutting me off mid-sentence to talk about the new designer handbag Cressida had just purchased using funds from the family trust. They had celebrated a piece of dyed leather and metal more than my years of grueling academic and professional sacrifice. My success was always treated as a threat to their ego, and my existence was only tolerable when I was paying their way out of trouble. The family trust was established decades ago by my late grandfather, explicitly designed to protect our generational assets from reckless management. The legal structure designated Rowena as the primary financial beneficiary to ensure her comfort. However, due to her staggering financial illiteracy and tendency to fall for bad investments, the estate lawyers had mandated a strict dual-key compliance protocol. As the only family member possessing an active professional fiduciary license, I was named the secondary compliance overseer. I could not withdraw the funds for my own personal use or luxury, but I held the absolute, unilateral authority to freeze the entire trust if I ever detected fraudulent disbursement patterns or unauthorized routing. For the past 2 years, I had maintained a strict hands-off approach, allowing Rowena and Cressida to draw their regular monthly stipends without interference or judgment. But recently, Rowena had pressured me into granting Cashin administrative access to the trust's ledger, claiming his technology startup required a temporary liquidity shield during a market dip. I accessed the main portal and bypassed the superficial user dashboard that they used to view their fake wealth. I dug straight into the raw routing data from the past 90 days, looking beneath the surface. The screen quickly populated with endless rows of transaction hashes, digital signatures, and international banking codes. I traced the outbound wire transfers methodically. The pattern emerged within minutes, clear as day. Cashin was not just managing the trust as agreed. He was actively bleeding it dry from the inside out. He had established a recurring series of authorized draws, funneling thousands of dollars every single week out of the secure family accounts and routing them directly into the operating accounts of his mobile app startup. He was using my family's generational legacy as a shadow liquidity pool to prop up his failing software company. My eyes scanned the numbers rapidly, calculating the exact financial deficit he had created. He was truly desperate. The technology sector in Dallas was hyper-competitive, and his latest funding rounds had stalled completely, leaving him on the brink of collapse. If I removed his access to the family trust tonight, his startup would hit a critical cash flow wall within 48 hours, destroying his illusion of success. I opened the Compliance Enforcement tab on my computer screen. A dense legal warning popped up immediately, requiring a secondary biometric authentication to initiate a structural freeze. I placed my right thumb firmly against the glass scanner embedded in the laptop chassis. The software chimed softly, verifying my identity and granting me full administrative override privileges. I navigated to the main control panel. The list of active beneficiaries and authorized signers appeared in a neat, orderly column. Cashin Montgomery was listed as a provisional manager. Rowena Caldwell was listed as the primary draw recipient. Cressida Caldwell was listed as a secondary draw recipient. I hovered the cursor over the master control switch. This was the point of no return, the threshold of the storm. Clicking this button would instantly sever their access to the funds permanently. Their platinum credit cards would immediately decline at every luxury store in the city. Their scheduled mortgage payments would bounce. Cashin's illicit corporate lifeline would evaporate into thin air within seconds. I did not hesitate for even a second. I pressed the trackpad down firmly. A bright red confirmation banner flashed across the top of the screen, indicating the unilateral asset freeze was officially active across all nodes. The legal mechanism was locked into place under a strict federal compliance review mandate. The trust was now a frozen monolith, entirely inaccessible until a formal forensic audit could be completed by certified professionals. I leaned back slowly in my ergonomic chair. The heavy, suspended silence of the room felt very different now. It was the heavy silence of a patient predator watching a delicate snare snap shut in the distance. Cashin was about to wake up tomorrow morning to a bank balance of absolute zero. And I had only just begun to tighten the ropes around his fraudulent world. The morning sun crested gracefully over the Dallas skyline, casting a sharp geometric shadow across my bedroom hardwood floor. I stepped out of the glass shower, wrapped a thick towel around my shoulders, and walked into the quiet kitchen to start the day. I poured a fresh cup of black coffee into my ceramic mug. My personal phone buzzed with a continuous, erratic rhythm against the granite counter, breaking the morning calm. I picked up the device and looked at the screen. It illuminated with dozens of urgent alerts, tags, and messages from various social media platforms. Cressida was exceptionally predictable when confronted with a problem she could not comprehend or control. She always reverted to public theatricality and playing the victim. I tapped the screen, opening the primary application where her profile was hosted. Cressida had posted a sprawling, multi-paragraph statement accompanied by a highly edited photograph of herself looking appropriately distressed and tearful outside her boutique storefront. It is heartbreaking when your own flesh and blood attempts to sabotage your hard-earned success, Cressida wrote in the dramatic digital post, fishing for sympathy. Vesper is a jealous, broke spinster who tried to steal from our family business out of pure spite. She skipped out on a massive charity dinner bill last night, leaving her own family to face the humiliating consequences alone. I scrolled down slowly, watching the hostile comments flood the screen from her loyal followers who knew nothing of the truth. Rowena had already shared the post to her extensive network of elite Dallas socialites, appending her own fabricated narrative to the top of the digital feed to maximize the damage. We tried so hard to support her through her ongoing financial failures and bitterness, Rowena added, her digital tone dripping with manufactured maternal sorrow. We kindly ask for privacy right now as we protect our family legacy from her toxic jealousy. I read the words twice, letting the cold glow of the screen reflect off my eyes without an ounce of emotion. A civilian might have typed out a furious, defensive rebuttal in the comments. A sister burdened by lingering affection might have recorded a tearful video, begging the public to see the real truth. I did not tap the reply button. I set the phone face down on the marble counter. I picked up my coffee mug and took a slow, measured sip of the bitter liquid. The smear campaign was a calculated public relations maneuver designed to silence me. Cashin had likely discovered the frozen trust account late last night when his automated payments failed. Unable to access the funds to cover his tracks, he instructed Cressida and Rowena to launch a preemptive strike against my personal character. They wanted to destroy my credibility in the social circles so that if I ever spoke out about their financial mismanagement, I would merely look like a bitter, discredited liar throwing a tantrum. They were playing a messy game of social optics and public perception. I operate strictly in the realm of federal corporate compliance and hard mathematics. I dressed in a sharp, tailored navy suit, grabbed my leather briefcase, and drove to a small, unassuming coffee shop tucked away on the industrial outskirts of the city. I walked in, scanned the room, and spotted Thaddeus sitting quietly in a secluded corner booth. Thaddeus was a 33-year-old cybersecurity engineer, an old college friend who preferred the glow of computer terminals to human interaction. He wore a faded gray hoodie and pushed his wire-rimmed glasses up the bridge of his nose as I slid into the booth across from him. "You are trending on local social media," Thaddeus said quietly, turning his laptop screen slightly so I could see Cressida's malicious post in full detail. "Are you going to let them crush you with these fake metrics and lies?" "No," I replied, my voice steady and cold. "I need you to help me look behind the curtain at the source code of the person who funded those fake likes and traffic." Thaddeus raised an eyebrow, a faint smirk touching his lips. He did not ask unnecessary questions. He understood the assignment completely. He opened a secure, anonymous terminal tunnel, his fingers flying across the mechanical keyboard with rapid, precise movements. Cashin's mobile app startup is built entirely on a house of cards, I explained, leaning closer to the screen as data began to load. He has been siphoning the family trust to keep his lights on for months. I need to see his supply chain logistics and outbound ledgers. Thaddeus bypassed the superficial security firewalls of Cashin's corporate servers within minutes, breaking through like a ghost. The raw data began to cascade down the monitor in dense, endless blocks of green typography. We were actively breaching the shadow network Cashin used to hide his financial ruin from the world. If you have ever been smeared and gaslit by toxic family members on social media, drop a comment saying "I'm win" right now. I will heart and reply to every single "I'm win" comment because we survivors have to stick together in the trenches. Thaddeus ran a localized filtering algorithm, isolating the corporate expenditure reports from the past 36 months. We were looking for hidden anomalies, financial irregularities, and systemic bleeding. The data was vast, confusing, and heavily encrypted, but Thaddeus and I had the patience of snipers waiting in the brush for the perfect shot. While Thaddeus continued to run deep diagnostic scrapes on Cashin's corporate servers, I had a critical physical errand to run across town. I left the quiet coffee shop and drove straight into the heart of the downtown business district. I parked my sedan in an underground garage and walked into a sleek commercial high-rise, riding the elevator up to a boutique legal services firm on the 14th floor. I approached the front desk, retrieving a thin manila folder from my briefcase. Inside rested the original cosigner agreement for Cressida's luxury skincare boutique loan from 2 years ago, when Rowena had begged me for help. I had drafted the paperwork myself at the time. I had embedded a strict, unilateral severance clause deep within the fine print, allowing me to detach my personal liability and my social security number from the business entity upon documented evidence of fiduciary mismanagement. Cashin draining the family trust qualified as severe, textbook mismanagement under any legal standard. I need an official witness and a certified notary seal, I said calmly, sliding the paperwork across the polished mahogany counter. The notary scanned the dense legal text with sharp eyes. He verified my government identification, handed me a clean blue ink pen, and pointed directly to the designated signature line. I gripped the pen tightly. I pressed the tip against the heavy parchment paper, my signature flowing in a smooth, dark, unbroken line. I did not hesitate for a fraction of a second. The ink soaked deep into the page, permanently severing my financial tether to Cressida's failing brand. The notary picked up his heavy metal embossing stamp and pressed it down onto the paper with a sharp, echoing thud that made the desk vibrate. Fax a certified copy directly to the commercial lender immediately, I ordered, my voice low, steady, and authoritative. Use the direct routing number listed on page 3 of the agreement. He fed the pages into the secure digital transmission machine without a word. The document fired through the encrypted telecom lines straight to the underwriting department of the primary commercial bank holding Cashin's corporate debt. I walked out of the office, my heels clicking sharply off the marble floor. I knew exactly how the commercial banking algorithms functioned behind closed doors. Cashin had structured his entire financial existence using aggressive cross-collateralization tactics. He leveraged the perceived stability of Cressida's boutique to bolster his own startup's risk profile. The commercial bank had only approved his massive loans because the boutique was artificially propped up by my flawless credit score and my steady income. The automated risk algorithms governing commercial lending do not possess human emotions. They do not read social media smear campaigns or family gossip. They care exclusively about hard data, debt ratios, and guarantor stability. The moment the notary's fax hit the underwriting servers downtown, my name, my social security number, and my credit history vanished from Cressida's ledger. The artificial safety net evaporated into thin air. The boutique's risk profile plummeted instantly, exposing its true, fragile nature. The downgrade triggered a cascading alert deep within the bank's automated server farms. Red flags began to populate across the dashboard. Cashin's outstanding startup loans were instantly shifted from active standing to probationary administrative review. The automated systems triggered a localized freeze on his corporate credit lines pending a manual audit. I checked my watch as I stepped out into the sunlight. It was 10 in the morning. Cressida was likely standing inside her luxurious downtown boutique right now, running a live video stream for her followers, weeping about how I had betrayed the family. What she did not know was that the point-of-sale terminal sitting on her pristine glass counter was already dead. When her first customer of the day attempted to swipe a credit card to purchase an expensive jar of face cream, the terminal would flash a harsh red error code. Her merchant account was frozen solid. Her wholesale supply chain orders would bounce. The safety net was severed completely. Now I just had to watch gravity do the rest of the work. I navigated the dense downtown traffic and steered my sedan toward the towering glass monolith that housed my own firm, Vanguard Equity Partners. The moment I stepped out of the executive elevator onto my floor, the atmosphere felt unnervingly tense and quiet. My desk phone rang before I even reached my office door. It was my boss, the managing partner of the firm, Jonathan. He summoned me to his corner office immediately. I walked in to find him sitting rigidly behind his massive mahogany desk, looking exhausted and politically cornered. Cashin spent the last hour calling our advisory board, my boss stated, skipping all pleasantries. The retaliatory strike was swift and vicious. Cashin was bleeding from the administrative banking freeze I had triggered earlier that morning. Rather than focusing on saving his mobile app startup, his fragile, inflated ego demanded immediate vengeance. He had utilized his remaining social capital to contact older, wealthy board members, spinning a fabricated narrative that I was a volatile, vindictive liability suffering from a severe psychological breakdown. He used Cressida's viral social media post as concrete proof of my instability, threatening to pull his future funding rounds from our network if I wasn't dealt with. "I am placing you on administrative leave for the week," my boss said, pulling a formal printed document from a folder and sliding it across the desk. I stepped forward and accepted the paper. I did not argue the unfairness of the decision. I did not point out my flawless track record or the millions of dollars in revenue I had generated for the firm over the past 5 years. Engaging in a defensive argument would only validate Cashin's fabricated claims of my emotional instability. Silence was the ultimate armor. "I will clear my desk immediately, Jonathan," I stated calmly, turning my back to him. Cashin believed he had just delivered a crippling, devastating blow to my professional identity. He assumed that stripping away my job would reduce me to a weeping, defeated victim. He fundamentally misunderstood the nature of my power. The administrative leave was not a punishment at all. It was a tactical advantage, providing me with endless, uninterrupted time to orchestrate his corporate war. I drove back to the coffee shop where Thaddeus was still monitoring the data streams on his laptop. I opened my laptop and connected back to a secure anonymous tunnel. "Did you find the anomaly in the supply chain?" I asked, taking a seat across from him. Thaddeus nodded grimly, tapping his screen. Cashin is paying exorbitant recurring monthly fees to a network of 3 specific software licensing vendors. The invoices look clean on the surface, but I ran a diagnostic against national corporate registries. They do not have physical office addresses. They do not have active customer service lines. They are shell corporations, I realized, my eyes narrowing as I looked at the routing numbers. They are phantom vendors. Cashin, operating as the chief executive officer, had unilateral authority to approve supply chain expenditures. He was generating fabricated invoices from these shell companies, approving the payments through his own accounting department, and bleeding the venture capital straight out of his startup. I ran a macro calculation on the total outbound transfers routed to the phantom vendors over the 3-year period. The final sum flashed at the bottom of the spreadsheet in bold red typography. It was $4,200,000. The magnitude of the corporate theft was staggering. Cashin was committing severe federal wire fraud. I traced the money through the offshore holdings. The stolen capital was not going to software development or technology infrastructure. It was being routed directly to a commercial real estate firm in Dallas to pay the exorbitant commercial rent for Cressida's failing vanity boutique. He was stealing investor money to buy her affection and secure his place in high society. He took away my job for a week. In exchange, I just found the exact key to his federal prison cell. The morning sun had barely crested over the sprawling glass and steel structures of the downtown district when the heavy oak doors of the Vanguard Equity Partners lobby swung open violently. The usual hushed, professional atmosphere of the executive wing was shattered by the sharp, erratic sound of high heels striking the polished marble floor. I was sitting in a temporary glass-walled conference room on the 42nd floor, reviewing the digital files Thaddeus had helped me extract. I looked up through the glass partition. Cressida was marching across the lobby, demanding an audience. She wore a vibrant emerald silk dress that looked entirely out of place in a corporate financial firm, clutching a white designer handbag as if it were a physical shield against her impending bankruptcy. Her posture was rigidly straight, her chin angled upward in a display of practiced superiority, but the frantic, panicked energy radiating from her skin told an entirely different story. She spotted me through the glass and stormed into the conference room without knocking, shoving the door so hard it bounced against the stopper. She snatched a thick stack of legal-sized papers from her handbag and slammed them directly onto the table in front of me. "You are going to unfreeze the trust right now," Cressida hissed, her voice echoing off the glass walls, drawing the curious stares of several junior analysts passing by. I did not flinch. I kept my hands resting casually on my lap, my posture perfectly straight, my heart rate holding steady at a calm 60 beats per minute. "Lower your voice, Cressida," I instructed, my tone barely above a whisper. "Take the papers, Vesper," she countered, shaking the stack inches from my face. "Cashin had his lawyers draft this. It is a civil defamation lawsuit. We are suing you for every single dollar you have." I raised my right hand and smoothly slipped the documents from her shaking grip. I did not break eye contact. I did not look down at the text. The front page featured the bold lettering of a fabricated legal threat, drafted in a desperate attempt to force my compliance. Cashin had clearly instructed her to serve these papers in my workplace, banking on the assumption that the sheer threat of a public scene and litigation would terrify me into submission. It was a classic intimidation tactic, relying entirely on smoke and mirrors. The paper felt cheap and thin between my fingers. I folded the lawsuit precisely in half and slid it into the side pocket of my leather briefcase. Cressida stood there, her chest heaving with shallow, rapid breaths. She waited for my reaction. She expected tears, defensive arguments, or a frantic attempt to usher her into a private corner to negotiate terms. She received a cold, unblinking stare. Earlier that morning, while tracing the stolen $4,200,000 through Cashin's phantom vendor network, I identified the exact commercial real estate firm holding the lease for Cressida's luxury skincare boutique. The property was severely over-leveraged, and the rent was consistently paid late, covered only by Cashin's illicit offshore wire transfers. When I froze the family trust and the commercial bank flagged Cashin's loans, his shadow liquidity pool evaporated. The boutique's massive rent payment for the current month had officially bounced. A missed payment on a commercial lease triggers a mandatory grace period, but a corporate debt buyer can waive that grace period by acquiring the distressed asset directly. I had routed a secondary transaction through a Vanguard subsidiary specifically engineered for rapid debt acquisition. I purchased the specific debt portfolio associated with her retail location. The transaction cleared in 12 minutes. I legally owned her lease. I unlatched the main compartment of my briefcase. The brass lock clicked sharply, a crisp sound that momentarily drew her attention downward. I withdrew a single heavyweight parchment envelope bearing the embossed seal of a commercial property management firm. "You think a fake lawsuit scares me?" Cressida sneered, stepping closer, attempting to project confidence. "I think you need to read this," I replied softly, extending the envelope toward her. Cressida snatched the envelope, her eyes darting across the wax seal. Her bravado faltered for a fraction of a second. She ripped the paper open, her polished nails tearing the flap unevenly, discarding the torn scrap onto the pristine floor. She pulled out the certified legal notice. The document was a formal declaration of commercial rent default and immediate eviction proceedings. I watched the biological mechanics of pure panic dismantle her arrogant facade piece by piece. The crimson flush in her cheeks vanished, replaced by a sickly, translucent pallor. Her lips parted, drawing in a sharp, jagged breath that failed to reach her lungs. The hand holding the notice began to tremble violently, causing the heavy parchment to rustle audibly in the quiet room. "This is a mistake," Cressida whispered, her eyes frantically scanning the eviction clauses. "The rent check bounced, but Cashin is fixing it today." "Cashin cannot access the funds," I stated, keeping my posture rigid. "His credit lines are frozen. The family trust is locked." She looked up at me. The reality of her situation penetrated the thick layer of entitlement she wore like armor. The skincare boutique was not a profitable enterprise. It was a vanity project, a social focal point that allowed her to host extravagant launch parties and mingle with the Dallas elite. The physical storefront was the anchor of her entire identity. The document in her hands represented the immediate, unavoidable seizure of that identity. The junior analyst standing outside the glass walls remained perfectly still. The silence magnified the rustling of the paper in Cressida's shaking grip. She realized the audience she had gathered to witness my humiliation was currently watching her own financial execution. "You bought the lease," Cressida said, her breath hitching in her throat. I offered a slow, deliberate nod. I did not need to speak. The mathematics of her ruin were printed clearly in black ink. Without the physical storefront, her vendors would cancel their pending orders. Her wholesale distributors would demand immediate cash upon delivery. The entire operational structure of her brand would implode before the end of the business week. Cressida dropped her designer handbag onto the floor. The heavy metal clasps clattered loudly against the stone. She gripped the eviction notice with both hands, her eyes wide and unfocused. She was searching for a loophole, a hidden clause that would grant her a reprieve from the inevitable. There was none. I had authored the default terms myself, ensuring the eviction process was streamlined, irrevocable, and immune to standard civil appeals. She took a stumbling step backward. Her heel caught on the strap of her fallen bag, causing her to lose her balance. She caught herself against the glass partition, her manicured fingers slipping against the smooth surface. The emerald dress she wore suddenly looked oversized, swallowing her shrinking, defeated frame. "You cannot do this to me," Cressida gasped, thick tears welling in her eyes, ruining her expensive mascara. "The physical locks on the front doors change at exactly 8 o'clock tomorrow morning," I informed her, turning my head slightly toward the exit. She did not attempt to argue the legality of the document. The sheer, overwhelming weight of the financial truth crushed her fabricated defiance. She bent down, grabbing the strap of her bag with uncoordinated, jerky movements. She turned toward the doors, her pace frantic and erratic. She shoved her way through the exit, running barefoot in her mind despite wearing heels, desperate to escape the glass box of her own destruction. She came to humiliate me, but she left without a business. Keep watching, because her fiancé was about to make an even bigger mistake. Cashin was trapped in a rapidly shrinking box, suffocating under the weight of his own financial incompetence. The sudden commercial banking freeze had cut off his oxygen. Cressida was actively pushing the walls inward, screaming about the commercial eviction notice and demanding he produce the cash required to halt the proceedings. He needed a massive, immediate influx of capital to silence her, placate his investors, and avoid federal prison for the $4,200,000 he had embezzled. He was bypassing standard venture capital channels and coming directly to the apex predators. He had booked an emergency priority pitch meeting with Vanguard Equity Partners, seeking a $25 million Series B capital injection. He had no idea that the exact woman he had attempted to ruin was the one drafting the contract. I retreated to a secure, isolated terminal in the administrative wing. I opened a blank legal document. A standard $25 million Series B term sheet usually required weeks of intense negotiation, armies of corporate lawyers, and endless redline revisions. Cashin did not have weeks. He did not have days. He was gasping for corporate oxygen, meaning he would blindly sign whatever document Vanguard pushed across the table just to secure the immediate liquidity. I began to type. The mechanical clatter of the keyboard echoed sharply against the walls. I structured the primary debt vehicle, laying out the $25 million as a senior secured convertible note. On the surface, the numbers appeared aggressively favorable to his mobile app startup. It looked like the exact financial lifeline Cashin desperately craved to validate his fabricated success. Then I moved to the covenants. This was the architecture of the guillotine. I bypassed the standard default clauses. I authored a highly specific, irrevocable intellectual property forfeiture mechanism. I tied the default trigger directly to the legitimacy of his existing financial disclosures. I typed a sequence of complex legal parameters ensuring the language was dense, impenetrable, and mathematically absolute. If any external audit revealed a discrepancy exceeding 5% in his supply chain logistics, the $25 million debt would instantly accelerate. Furthermore, I embedded a toxic poison pill deep within the bankruptcy provisions. If his startup attempted to file for Chapter 11 protection to shield its assets from Vanguard, the filing itself would act as a unilateral assignment of all proprietary software, source code, and trademarks directly to Vanguard equity partners. I assigned myself as the sole corporate executor of the transfer. My fingers moved in a relentless, punishing rhythm. I was weaving a lethal trap out of regulatory jargon and federal compliance statutes. If he breached the covenants, he would not just lose his company. He would lose his intellectual property, his future earning potential, and his freedom. Vanguard would legally own the very code he used to build his fraudulent empire. While the 50-page document printed in the executive copy room, my secure tablet emitted a sharp chime. It was a priority alert. Rowena had officially launched her media strike. She had leveraged her decades of social networking to orchestrate a catastrophic professional hit piece published in the Dallas Executive Ledger, the most widely circulated business journal in the state. The headline was brutal, accusing a senior Vanguard executive of erratic psychological meltdowns and fabricating a story about me throwing glassware in a restaurant. She intended to strip away my career, my income, and my identity in a single coordinated strike, hoping to trigger a permanent revocation of my fiduciary license. I felt my pulse settle into a steady, rhythmic thud. I tapped the screen, opening a secondary browser window to dissect the journal's corporate architecture. The Dallas Executive Ledger was owned by a holding company currently drowning in massive operational debt. Vanguard equity partners held their primary debt portfolio. I possessed direct unilateral authority over the restructuring covenants determining the media company's survival. I picked up my mobile phone and dialed the direct extension for the publisher of the journal. The line rang twice before a deep voice answered. Marcus speaking, the publisher answered, his tone carrying forced authority. This is Vesper, I stated, my voice dropping to an icy register. The line went dead silent. The sound of shuffling papers filtered through the receiver. He recognized the name of the woman his publication had just publicly defamed. We stand by our reporting, Marcus deflected, his breathing accelerating audibly. Your reporting relies on an unverified source, I corrected, tapping my fingernail against the desk. Vanguard owns your operational debt, Marcus. The shuffling of papers stopped instantly. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating over the cellular connection. He realized the woman he had just published a hit piece on was currently holding the life support plug to his entire publication. His arrogance dissolved, replaced by the acute, terrifying awareness of his own vulnerability. What do you want? Marcus asked, his tone dropping into a strained, compliant whisper. You will publish a mandatory follow-up piece, I instructed. Focus on Cashin's mobile app startup. You will request his unredacted financial disclosures under the pretense of journalistic due diligence. I ended the call with a definitive tap. The mechanism was perfectly primed. The Dallas Executive Ledger, desperate to avoid a catastrophic debt acceleration from Vanguard, would immediately draft a formal request for Cashin's corporate financial records. Cashin would realize that refusing the disclosure would signal severe financial instability, instantly killing the Vanguard deal and publicly humiliating him before the ink could even dry. He would have to hand over his balance sheets to the press. Because his actual ledgers were a wasteland of corporate theft and offshore transfers, he would be forced to forge federal financial documents and submit them to a public media outlet, committing a severe federal crime on the public record just to save face. The pressure was compounding, crushing his chest, and he was completely unaware of the anvil dropping toward his skull. The glass screen of my tablet illuminated the dark confines of my home office later that evening. I tapped the display, unmuting the live video feed broadcasting from Cressida's social media profile. The shrill, pulsing bass of electronic dance music vibrated through the small external speakers, filling my quiet room with the sounds of their fabricated triumph. Cressida filled the frame, wearing a white silk slip dress that caught the harsh glare of the setting sun. She held a crystal champagne flute in her right hand, the golden liquid sloshing over the rim as she spun in a slow, unsteady circle. The camera panned outward, revealing the polished teak deck of a massive luxury yacht, cutting through the deep waters of a local lake. Dozens of guests crowded the multi-level vessel. Waiters in crisp white uniforms navigated the sprawling sunbathers, carrying heavy silver trays piled high with imported caviar and premium seafood. Cashin stepped into the camera frame, wrapping a heavy arm around Cressida's waist. He wore a bespoke linen shirt unbuttoned at the collar. He looked like a man who had just conquered the entire financial sector. He believed his emergency pitch to Vanguard earlier that day had secured his salvation. He thought the $25 million Series B contract waiting for his signature tomorrow morning was a blank check, an undeniable validation of his fabricated genius. He was burning the last remaining drops of his stolen corporate liquidity on a floating spectacle to celebrate a victory that did not exist. "We secured the bag today," Cressida shrieked into the microphone, her pupils dilated. She leaned into the lens, her manicured fingernail tapping the glass. "Some people try to ruin the elite. You are just a background character," she stated, her voice dripping with venom directed solely at me. "Winners stay winning," Cashin added, tapping his champagne flute against hers. I did not throw the tablet against the wall. I did not clench my jaw or type a furious response into the comment section. I simply watched the crystal glass chime, measuring the exact volume of his delusion. They were dancing on the deck of a sinking ship, toasting to their own impending execution. I swiped the video away, terminating the feed with a single swipe of my index finger. I shifted my focus from their social performance to the underlying corporate logistics. A yacht of that magnitude, staffed with a full catering crew and an open premium bar, required a massive upfront deposit. Cashin's commercial banking lines were frozen under administrative review, and the family trust was securely locked. He had zero personal liquidity. He had to finance the party using the only capital he still controlled. I ran a deep forensic scrape on the outbound wire transfers originating from his startup over the past 12 hours. The raw data cascaded down my primary monitor. I applied a localized filtering algorithm, isolating expenditures processed within the Dallas area. The anomaly surfaced within 40 seconds. A wire transfer totaling $52,000 had cleared the corporate ledger at 10 in the morning. The recipient was a premier maritime rental and event logistics firm based in North Texas. He had made an unforgivable amateur error. He had drawn the $52,000 directly from the primary operational holding account tied to his initial series of funding round. He was using seed capital designated strictly for software development to pay for silk dresses, caviar, and a luxury yacht rental. I opened a secondary window accessing the capitalization table for his startup. The lead investor for the Series A round was a formidable federal audit liaison and venture capitalist named Octavia. Octavia was a woman known for her ruthless operational oversight and her zero-tolerance policy for founder mismanagement. She had injected $8 million into Cashin's startup, expecting aggressive technological expansion, not floating vanity projects. I extracted the unredacted invoice from the maritime rental company, capturing the itemized list of premium liquor, the yacht charter fees, and the private DJ booking. I merged the invoice with the official bank routing receipt, creating a singular, undeniable PDF document. The file proved down to the exact cent that Octavia's venture capital was currently funding Cashin's yacht party. I drafted a new message from a secure, untraceable compliance email relay. I did not include a subject line. I did not write a lengthy explanation. A seasoned federal auditor only requires the raw data to understand the insult. I attached the PDF document and inputted the direct private email address for Octavia. My index finger hovered over the trackpad. I pressed down, executing the transmission. The email vanished into the encrypted relay, hurtling directly toward the inbox of a woman who held the power to shatter Cashin's fragile reality. Cashin was currently floating in the middle of a lake, surrounded by 200 intoxicated guests, trapped on a vessel he had rented with stolen money. When Octavia opened that email, she would not just freeze his accounts. She would mandate a full, aggressive federal audit of his entire operation. She would demand to see every single ledger by tomorrow morning. Cashin was dancing, oblivious to the fact that he was running out of time. He needed the $25 million from Vanguard now more than he needed oxygen. It was the only way to plug the massive hole in his balance sheet before Octavia's auditors arrived. He had to sign the convertible debt structure I had drafted. He had to place his neck inside the noose I had woven because the ground beneath his feet had just collapsed entirely. Cashin is dancing on a yacht paid for by stolen funds. He doesn't know that he is just 12 hours before the FBI knocks on his door, and his only way out is to sign the death warrant I wrote for him. My low heels tapped a precise rhythm across the 42nd floor lobby. The digital clock mounted on the slate wall behind the reception desk read 8:45 in the morning. I carried a single black leather portfolio under my left arm. The Vanguard Equity Partners' primary boardroom was fully prepared. I bypassed the standard security checkpoints, pushed the heavy glass double doors open, and stepped into the chilled, conditioned air of the executive suite. The polished mahogany table stretched 20 feet across the center of the room, reflecting the recessed lighting like a dark mirror. I walked to the absolute furthest end, positioning my chair so my back faced the panoramic glass windows overlooking the sprawling Dallas skyline. I laid my portfolio flat upon the wood. I did not open it. I interlaced my fingers in my lap, slowed my heart rate, and waited in the silence. At exactly 8:55, the heavy frosted glass doors swung inward with a sharp rushing sound. Cashin crossed the threshold, projecting the manufactured, desperate aura of an untouchable corporate titan. He wore a brand-new bespoke navy suit, the premium fabric perfectly tailored to hide the physical exhaustion vibrating beneath his skin. His jaw was locked tight. He adjusted his silk tie with a sharp, arrogant tug, his eyes scanning the opulent boardroom. Cressida and Rowena flanked him closely, moving in synchronized, entitled lockstep. Cressida wore a vibrant designer suit, clutching her handbag as if it were a shield against her impending bankruptcy. Rowena walked directly beside her daughter, her expensive heels clicking loudly against the hardwood floor. They had lost the boutique lease, but in their minds, this $25 million capital injection would instantly erase their defeats. Cashin pulled out the heaviest leather chair at the exact center of the table. He sat down, unbuttoning his suit jacket with a practiced, sweeping motion. He noticed me sitting in the quiet periphery. A micro-expression of sudden anxiety flashed across his face before a smug, predatory smile stretched across his features. He genuinely thought I was sitting at the end of the table to witness him secure his ultimate victory. "You always did lack vision, Vesper," Cashin stated, his tone dripping with practiced condescension. I did not blink. I kept my breathing slow and measured, maintaining eye contact. "This firm appreciates real innovation," Cashin added, tapping his gold watch against the table. Cressida leaned over his right shoulder, her lips curving into a vicious, triumphant smirk. "Enjoy the view from the bottom," she whispered, her eyes flashing with malicious delight. I maintained absolute silence. Engaging in verbal sparring would validate their fabricated existence. My total lack of a defensive response unnerved them, forcing Cashin to shift his weight uncomfortably in his leather chair. My boss, Jonathan, entered the boardroom exactly at 9 o'clock. He carried the thick leather-bound document folder I had prepared. 2 junior legal associates followed closely behind him. Jonathan did not greet Cashin with a smile. He maintained a stoic, impenetrable expression. He stopped at the center of the table and placed the heavy leather binder directly in front of Cashin. The solid thud of the document hitting the mahogany echoed sharply in the quiet room. "The Series B term sheet is finalized," Jonathan announced, his voice devoid of emotion. Cashin leaned forward instantly, his eyes locking onto the embossed Vanguard logo. His breathing accelerated, his chest rising and falling in shallow, rapid movements. The sheer, blinding desperation he had been masking all morning threatened to break completely through his arrogant facade. He desperately needed this venture capital to cover his massive phantom vendor fraud and to halt the aggressive internal audit Octavia had demanded during the night. He was suffocating under a mountain of federal crimes. "We are ready to scale immediately," Cashin declared, puffing his chest out slightly. Jonathan flipped the heavy cover open. The first page detailed the $25 million capital transfer in bold black ink. Cashin stared at the typed numbers, his pupils dilating visibly in the harsh light. He did not ask the junior associates to summarize the protective covenants. He did not have his own corporate legal counsel present to review the dense fine print. His arrogance and his sheer, blinding panic blinded him to the structural integrity of the contract. He turned the thick parchment pages with frantic, trembling fingers. He skipped past the primary default clauses. He flipped right over the highly specific, irrevocable intellectual property forfeiture mechanism I had engineered. He ignored the toxic poison pill embedded directly within the bankruptcy provisions. He saw only the money. He saw only the survival of his fabricated empire. "Sign the final 3 pages," Jonathan instructed, tapping the bottom of the parchment. A junior associate stepped forward, placing a heavy silver fountain pen directly next to the document. Cashin picked up the pen. His hand shook slightly as he adjusted his grip, his knuckles turning a pale, sickly white. Rowena leaned closer, her eyes gleaming with unfiltered greed. "This changes everything for us," Rowena murmured, resting her hand on Cashin's shoulder. He signed his full legal name on the first signature line, the blue ink bleeding slightly into the page. He flipped to the next section, his movements frantic and hurried. He signed the secondary covenant agreement, authorizing the structural trap. He flipped to the final page, securing the personal guarantee against his proprietary software and intellectual property. He dragged the pen across the dotted line for the third and final time, finalizing the execution. He capped the silver pen with a sharp, definitive click. The trap was permanently locked into place. Cashin pushed the heavy leather binder back across the mahogany table. He exhaled a long, shuddering breath, his shoulders dropping 2 inches as the crushing weight of his financial terror temporarily lifted. He believed he had saved his startup from the impending internal audit, validating his fabricated metrics. Jonathan closed the leather binder. He nodded at the junior associate. "The funds will enter escrow shortly," Jonathan stated, picking up the secured contract. He turned and walked briskly out of the boardroom. Cashin stood up, buttoning his bespoke suit jacket with an arrogant flick of his wrists. He looked down the length of the long table at me, his eyes burning with malice. "You can leave now," Cashin ordered, pointing a finger toward the exit. I remained seated. I reached across the table and tapped a single isolated key on my secure tablet. The command bypassed the standard Vanguard security firewall and injected directly into the automated compliance matrix overseeing his specific contract. The covenant breach clause I had embedded within the fine print activated instantly. The software scanned the state financial registry, identifying the active, highly aggressive federal audit mandated by Octavia just hours prior. The algorithm registered the audit as a severe, unresolved discrepancy. The execution was entirely automated, instantaneous, and mathematically flawless. Cashin's personal laptop, resting on the table, emitted a loud, piercing tone. A blinding, blood-red error notification consumed his entire screen. The digital text flashed in bold, citing a catastrophic violation of the default covenants. "What is happening to the screen?" Cressida asked, her voice cracking with sudden panic. Cashin slammed his fist against the keyboard, the plastic keys rattling under the impact. "The transfer is locked," Cashin gasped, his breathing turning shallow and erratic. He grabbed the mouse, furiously clicking the refresh icon. The red error message refused to vanish. The Vanguard internal system had triggered an irreversible freeze on the $25 million. The funds were violently yanked from the pending transfer portal and locked within the impenetrable escrow vault of the firm. He could not move a single cent. He could not access the capital required to hide his $4,200,000 of stolen phantom vendor funds. The money he needed to survive the impending audit was securely trapped behind a wall of impenetrable legal architecture. "Fix the transaction immediately," Cashin, Rowena ordered, her hands shaking violently. "I cannot access the money," Cashin whispered, his vocal cords paralyzed by pure fear. He was legally bound to Vanguard Equity Partners, subject to our infinite oversight and mandatory reporting regulations, yet he possessed zero liquidity. He had traded away the complete ownership of his proprietary software for a massive loan he could not touch. "I am securing a bridge loan," Cashin stammered, pulling out his phone. "I will use the family estate as collateral to get cash today." Rowena flinched violently, her spine snapping perfectly straight. The sprawling Dallas estate was the singular remaining anchor of her fabricated social superiority. "You cannot mortgage my home," Rowena whispered. I unlatched the brass clasp of my black leather portfolio. The sharp metallic click severed the noise in the room. I withdrew a heavyweight legal-sized folder bound with a heavy red ribbon, signifying an active civil court filing. I slid it precisely across the mahogany table until it rested in front of Rowena. "The property is currently under immediate foreclosure," I stated, my voice dropping to a surgical calm. For weeks ago, Cashin had missed the primary mortgage payment on the estate, diverting the allocated trust funds to cover Cressida's failing retail boutique. The missed payment triggered an automatic 30-day grace period. I had tracked the missed transfer and utilized a secondary Vanguard shell corporation to purchase the distressed debt directly from her primary institutional lender. I owned the paper. I owned the house. Rowena opened the heavy cover. Her eyes darted wildly across the dense legal typography. She found my signature, notarized and federally stamped, solidifying my legal ownership of her entire generational foundation. The grace period had expired at midnight. The foreclosure was an active, executed legal reality. "You took my house," Rowena choked out, her vocal cords straining under the massive panic. "Real family always pays their own way," I replied smoothly, maintaining a deadpan expression. The pristine, untouchable alliance of the Caldwell women was disintegrating into physical chaos right in the middle of the boardroom. Rowena shoved her own daughter backward, screaming at Cashin. The immense pressure of financial ruin was crushing them, turning them into rabid animals fighting over the scraps of a fabricated empire. Cashin retreated from the screaming women, his back hitting the glass wall of the boardroom. His bespoke suit was wrinkled, his tie pulled loose. The manic adrenaline fueling his defensive posture evaporated, leaving his skin a terrifying shade of gray. He realized there was no hidden liquidity, no secondary trust fund, and no secret reserve account left to leverage. In a last, desperate attempt to save his core assets from the Vanguard escrow trap and the incoming federal auditors, Cashin pulled out his phone and frantically dialed his lead corporate attorney. "File for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection right now," Cashin yelled into the receiver, his voice cracking into a high-pitched rasp. "Execute the filing immediately. Generate the federal stay." He hung up the phone, chest heaving with desperate exertion. He glared at me, a wet, unhinged laugh escaping his throat. "The federal bankruptcy stay is active, Vesper. You cannot touch my company now. The federal court outranks your covenants. You are locked out." He believed he had outsmarted the massive Vanguard infrastructure. He genuinely thought the federal bankruptcy code was a heavy iron vault he could lock from the inside, keeping his technology out of my hands while the court stalled his creditors. I did not raise my voice. I did not display a single micro-expression of frustration. I picked up the executed Series B term sheet he had signed just 10 minutes prior. I turned directly to page 47, the exact section detailing the structural poison pill. I rotated the heavy parchment paper, sliding it back across the table until it rested inches from his shaking hands. I pointed my manicured index finger directly at paragraph 4, subsection C, filing Chapter 11 triggers an automatic, non-contestable assignment of 100% of your intellectual property directly to Vanguard. With myself as the sole corporate assignee, I stated, my tone devoid of all emotion. Cashin looked down at the paragraph. His eyes started rapidly across the dense legal typography. He searched frantically for the loophole, the clerical error, or the missing signature that would invalidate the trap. There was no error. His dark blue ink was permanently stained across the bottom of the page, directly beneath the exact clause I had just recited. The Federal Bankruptcy Code is designed to protect standard corporate physical assets from liquidation during a restructuring period. However, intellectual property rights can be contractually structured to reassign ownership upon the exact moment of a bankruptcy filing, severing the patents from the company entirely before the federal stay even formally activates. Cashin had not found a loophole to survive. He had actively reached into his own chest and pulled the trigger on the explosive device I had surgically implanted inside his contract. The very legal mechanism he attempted to use as a shield was the exact mechanism required to execute his total surrender. The patents, the proprietary source code, the primary server architecture, and the trademarked branding of his startup no longer belonged to his corporation. They belonged to Vanguard Equity Partners. More specifically, they were assigned directly to my personal corporate control. "This is illegal," Cashin choked out, his knees buckling, forcing him to grip the heavy edge of the table just to remain standing. "It is binding federal contract law," I corrected, tapping the mahogany surface once. Before Cashin could formulate a response, the heavy frosted glass doors of the boardroom swung open with an authoritative crash. 6 federal agents stepped into the room, their dark tactical vests heavily embroidered with bold yellow lettering. Octavia, the formidable federal audit liaison, walked in behind them, her expression carved from stone. "Cashin Montgomery," Octavia announced, her voice echoing violently across the room. "You are under arrest for 32 counts of severe federal wire fraud, mass corporate embezzlement, and the intentional falsification of financial documents." 2 federal agents moved with terrifying speed, grabbing Cashin by his shoulders and twisting his arms behind his back. The heavy steel handcuffs clicked around his wrists, locking away the man who had attempted to destroy my professional reputation to stroke his fragile ego. He was immediately reduced to a federal inmate number. The collateral damage decimated the remaining women, stripping them of everything they held sacred. The federal agents informed Cressida that her boutique inventory had been seized, directly linking her personal banking accounts to Cashin's massive fraud and exposing her as a primary beneficiary of stolen corporate capital. The government froze her remaining offshore holding accounts, stripping away every single dollar she possessed. Rowena stood paralyzed, holding the foreclosure notice, realizing she was officially a squatter in my property, subject to immediate eviction at dawn. I stood up slowly, smoothing the front of my tailored navy suit. I picked up my black leather portfolio from the table. I did not say a single word in response to their gloating turning into desperate, overlapping screams. I walked past the federal agents, past Cashin in handcuffs, and past my weeping mother and sister. I exited the boardroom, leaving them entirely alone to face the absolute carnage I had just orchestrated. 14 months later, the atmosphere in my office was transformed. I stood in front of the sweeping floor-to-ceiling windows of my newly expanded executive suite, looking out over the sprawling Dallas skyline. Vanguard Equity Partners had successfully absorbed the underlying source code of Cashin's startup, flawlessly integrating the proprietary software into our global restructuring algorithms. The aggressive acquisition yielded a net corporate profit of over $90 million within the first fiscal year, resulting in my immediate promotion to the senior managing director of the firm. Cashin was serving a 20-year sentence in a medium-security federal penitentiary. Rowena, the arrogant woman who once scoffed at anyone wearing off-the-rack clothing, took a minimum-wage position sorting damaged returns at a massive, unair-conditioned retail fulfillment warehouse. Cressida found employment wiping down sticky, syrup-stained tables during the graveyard shift at a 24-hour roadside diner on the industrial outskirts of the city, her manicured hands permanently blistered by harsh chemical degreasers. I held a heavy ceramic mug in my right hand, taking a slow, measured sip of black coffee. The bitter, complex flavor grounded me in the physical reality of my triumph. My personal bank accounts were impenetrable fortresses. My professional reputation was universally respected, and my daily existence was defined by profound, unbothered silence. Family is not an excuse to drain, abuse, and trample over someone's life. Self-worth is not an abstract concept debated at a chaotic dinner table. It is a heavily fortified perimeter, and anyone attempting to breach that perimeter must be met with the full, devastating weight of the consequences they blindly engineered. So, I have to ask you all, am I the villain for setting the trap, or was I just letting them destroy themselves with their own greed? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching this story. If you enjoyed seeing toxic entitlement meet absolute justice, hit that subscribe button, leave a like, and share it with someone who needs to hear this. See you in the next video.